HOA Karen ordered me off my porch. Then my Marine unit rolled up in uniform. The day I bought my first home felt like stepping into a dream. White picket fences, blooming azaleas, and friendly waves from neighbors across manicured lawns. Yet from my very first glimpse of that quiet cul-de-sac, a sense of unease crept up my spine. Something about the tidy perfection hinted at trouble in paradise, though I couldn't name it then. I certainly never expected a raging turf war, or that the self-appointed queen of the homeowners association would become my greatest adversary. Most of all, I didn't think a single confrontation on my porch would spiral into a battle that stretched my patience and tested my will. But one thing's for sure, I never back down. Before we dive in, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. If you're excited about this story, let us know. If you enjoyed the video, press 1. If not, press O. Your feedback really inspires me to gather more uplifting and meaningful stories. My name is Lucia Alvarez, and I learned discipline long before I stepped into a recruiter's office. Growing up in an immigrant family taught me resilience and respect for hard work. When I enlisted in the Marines right out of high school, I believed I'd found my calling: service, camaraderie, and a sense of belonging I'd craved my entire life. After completing my final tour overseas, I decided it was time to plant roots. That's how I found Mayfield Heights, a picturesque neighborhood of wide streets, dog-walking retirees, and an abundance of patriotic bunting. As soon as I saw the for sale sign in front of a quaint two-story with a wraparound porch, I knew I wanted it. The first week after moving in, I barely got a wink of sleep. Between unpacking and a mild anxiety over civilian routines, my mind whirred nonstop. At dawn, I'd sometimes stand on the porch with a cup of coffee, letting the morning air ground me. Surprisingly, my new neighbors always seemed pleasant. People waved from their driveways. A cheerful mother pushing a stroller smiled at me. I felt hopeful, convinced that I'd stumbled onto a slice of the American dream. But every patch of paradise has its serpent. On my second morning in the new house, I noticed a woman in pastel workout clothes jogging down the sidewalk. She slowed as she neared my place, giving my front lawn and porch plants a long, measuring stare. I offered a friendly nod, but her gaze lingered on me without returning the courtesy, as if she were taking notes. Then she picked up speed and jogged away. I shrugged it off, chalking up her attitude to a bad day. Later, I met Mr. Jacobson from across the street while I was wrestling a bulky box labeled kitchenware from the trunk of my car. The kindly older gentleman rushed over and insisted on helping. As we hauled the box up my porch steps, he asked if anyone had told me about the homeowners association. I admitted I'd heard bits and pieces, rules about lawn height, color restrictions for the exterior, that sort of thing, but assumed it was standard suburban protocol. "Oh, it's more than standard around here," Mr. Jacobson said with a wry chuckle. "Our HOA president is quite committed to the cause. Let's put it that way." I tucked a strand of hair behind my ear, a small prickle of unease stirring. "Does it get bad?" He hesitated. "Sometimes. She's strict, but if you follow the rule book, you should be fine. Just keep an eye on your garbage cans. She's known for handing out citations if your lid's on crooked." I laughed, uncertain. Maybe it was an exaggeration. I mean, how bad could a single person be? The following weekend, I decided to host a small housewarming get-together. I invited close friends, some Marines, the first served with who lived nearby, and a couple of local acquaintances I'd met at the gym. As the afternoon sun gleamed across the lawn, we set up a little barbecue in the backyard, laughter and chatter floating through the open windows. Then came a firm knock on my front door. I opened it to find the same woman from earlier, the one who'd paused during her jog. She wore a fitted blouse, pressed slacks, and carried a clipboard. Something in her stance reminded me of a commanding officer appraising a new recruit. "Hello," she said, her tone clipped. "I'm Charlene Price, president of the Mayfield Heights Homeowners Association. May I come in?" I stepped aside, unsure if I had a choice. She breezed into my foyer, eyes roving over the partly decorated walls. I had been meaning to welcome you, she said. I noticed you were having a gathering? My chest tightened. Yes, just a small barbecue with friends. She scribbled something on her clipboard. It appears there are more than 10 individuals in your backyard. According to the HOA bylaws, any gathering exceeding 10 people requires prior approval. I blinked in surprise. Really? That's a rule? Charlene nodded sharply. I trust you've read the handbook we mailed. Everyone in Mayfield Heights signs a contract agreeing to abide by these regulations. It keeps the neighborhood orderly. I'd skimmed the handbook, but it read like legalese. I'm sorry, I said genuinely. I didn't realize. It's just a casual get-together, nothing wild. She gave a curt nod, as if acknowledging my apology. This time I'll let it slide, but going forward, please fill out the appropriate form. Now, about your porch, my porch. A ripple of confusion passed through me. Charlene approached the open front door, her gaze drifting to the rocking chair and a couple of potted succulents I'd arranged along the railing. We have guidelines for exterior decor, including porch furniture and plant types. The color of your planters doesn't match the approved neutral palette. My annoyance flared, but I stifled it. She was being borderline ridiculous, but I forced a polite smile. I can repaint them if that's necessary. Charlene scribbled more notes. That would be best. I'll check back next week. With that, she pivoted and left, like she'd completed an inspection of the premises. I closed the door, heart pounding with indignation. The nerve. But I reminded myself I was new here. Maybe she was just doing her job. Perhaps once I made a few adjustments, she'd leave me alone. Little did I know this was only the beginning. Over the next month, I received 3 separate notices in my mailbox. One for the unapproved color palette of my porch planters, another for insufficient compliance with hedge trimming standards, and a third for hanging wind chimes without approval. Each notice threatened a fine if I didn't correct the issues within a specified time. Enclosed was an invitation, more like a summons to the next HOA meeting. I felt trapped in a bizarre drama where the simplest acts of home ownership became transgressions. I tried to keep my sense of humor about it, joking to my friend Paige that apparently even the local songbirds needed to file for a permit before chirping. But as the notices piled up, it started to weigh on me. My evenings turned into frantic question and answer sessions with the HOA rulebook, combing for obscure lines about permissible porch plants or allowable door wreaths. I'd survived Marine Corps boot camp, but this was a whole new level of petty bureaucracy. My inclination was to push back, yet I wondered if that would only invite more scrutiny. The day of the HOA meeting arrived. It took place in a small community center at the far end of Mayfield Heights. I walked into a sterile room lit by fluorescent bulbs. Rows of folding chairs faced a long table where Charlene sat, flanked by other board members. A group of about 20 residents had gathered, some whispering to each other, others sipping coffee. I took a seat in the back, half hoping to blend in. Charlene cleared her throat, calling the meeting to order. The agenda included landscaping budgets, a discussion on new streetlight installations, and complaints about alleged infractions. My stomach tightened when my name appeared on the list. Miss Alvarez, Charlene called. Please stand and address the matter of your repeated non-compliance. I rose, unsettled by the formal tension. I've tried to correct whatever was flagged, I began, forcing calm into my voice. If there's something I'm missing, let me know. Charlene delivered a thin smile. We appreciate that, but infractions have continued, including the color of your planters. An older woman on the board leaned forward. There's also a matter of wind chimes that exceed the noise limit. We've had at least 2 complaints. Confusion swept through me. My wind chimes were small, barely audible over a gentle breeze. Who was complaining? I believe I can address that by taking them down, I said, swallowing my resentment. Charlene eyed me. I'd recommend it. Otherwise, the HOA will issue a formal citation, which includes a fine. I felt my face grow hot. Understood. They moved on to the next topic, dismissing me like a misbehaving teenager. I sank back into my chair, anger coiling tight in my belly. I wanted to storm out, but I sat through the remainder of the meeting, gleaning more about the subtle tyranny that governed this place. Several neighbors seemed equally wary, though none spoke up. Afterward, I tried to catch the eye of a younger couple, but they hurried out before I could say a word. Tension simmered in the weeks following that meeting. Charlene's patrols past my house grew more frequent. One evening, I spotted her walking slowly with a phone in hand, snapping photos. It was a surreal sight, like she was building a case against me. Most nights, I only found solace by calling up friends from my old Marine unit, venting about the microaggressions that threatened to bury me in fines. One particularly humid afternoon, I came home late from volunteering at a local veteran support group. Exhausted, I longed to rest in the rocking chair on my porch. The moment I stepped onto my porch, I heard a sharp voice behind me. "You there, stop." I turned, flabbergasted. Charlene stood at the edge of my property. She marched up the steps, gaze narrowed. "What's the problem now?" I asked, trying hard not to let my anger show. She pointed at a newly potted fern. "That's not on the approved list of plant species." I stared at her. "It's a fern, for heaven's sake." She pursed her lips. "We have rules to maintain a cohesive aesthetic." I felt something snap inside me. I tried politeness, compliance, reason, but every olive branch I extended was seized upon and twisted into a new accusation. "It's my porch. Why don't you back off?" Charlene's eyes flashed. "I beg your pardon?" "You heard me," I said, crossing my arms. "I'm done with this constant harassment." Her nostrils flared. "You have no right to violate HOA guidelines, Miss Alvarez. Now remove that fern and vacate the porch until you're in full compliance." My breath caught. "You think you can order me off my porch?" She took a step closer, practically nose to nose. "Yes, I can. As HOA president, I have the authority to ensure our bylaws are respected." I almost laughed at the absurdity, but the tension crackled too fiercely. "You're crossing a line," I warned. "I'm not going anywhere. If you want to call the cops or the board, be my guest." Charlene's cheeks reddened. "Fine, I will." She stormed off, barking into her phone as she disappeared down the sidewalk. My legs trembled from the adrenaline rush. Here I was, a Marine who had faced real threats overseas, and yet a suburban busybody had me shaking in rage. I sank into the rocking chair, heart pounding. Sure enough, the following week, official notices arrived in my mailbox, thick as a small novel. Multiple fines were itemized, apparently each plant pot, each wind chime, and each unapproved porch fixture warranted its own penalty. It was an outrageous sum that I had no intention of paying without a fight. I consulted a local attorney specializing in HOA disputes. She explained that while HOAs do have significant authority, they also must abide by their own charters and state laws. She recommended I gather evidence, photographs, any communications, and testimonies from neighbors who'd experienced similar harassment. As I built my case, however, I faced a problem. The neighbors were terrified of Charlene. A few had quietly shared their horror stories. One woman had been fined for placing a small, playful garden gnome near her flower bed. Another was forced to repaint his garage door at considerable cost because Charlene decided the color wasn't earth tone enough. Yet, not one of them dared speak against her publicly. Fear of retaliation silenced them. I felt alone and increasingly anxious. My once idyllic porch, meant for sipping lemonade and greeting passers-by, had become a battlefield. My phone calls with Marine buddies were my only emotional lifeline. They encouraged me to stand firm, reminding me of our training, perseverance, loyalty, and never leaving a fellow soldier behind. Still, my nights became restless. I'd wake in the dark, sure I heard footsteps or cameras clicking outside. The final straw came one scorching afternoon when I discovered my potted fern missing. In its place lay a handwritten note on HOA letterhead, reading, "Removed for non-compliance." Fury twisted my stomach. Trespassing on my property to seize a potted plant, felt like an ominous escalation. If Charlene believed she could simply waltz onto my porch and remove my belongings at will, what was next? I marched to Charlene's house, 2 blocks away, a tidy brick ranch with a meticulously groomed lawn. I pounded on her door. She answered, face calm, as though she'd been expecting me. "Where's my fern?" I demanded, voice shaking. She shrugged. "Confiscated as evidence of your unwillingness to follow community standards." "That's theft," I hissed. Charlene gave a tight smile. "You're welcome to pursue legal avenues, Miss Alvarez, but I assure you, the HOA board stands by its enforcement measures." My teeth clenched so hard my jaw ached. "You'll regret this." A flicker of something crossed her face. Annoyance, or maybe satisfaction. We'll see. After that, I seriously considered moving. The tension in my own home felt suffocating. Each day, I dreaded looking at the mailbox, worried about the next volley of fines or threats. But the Marine in me balked at retreating. I refused to be bullied out of a house I loved. One evening, exhausted after a long shift at the Veteran Center, I sank onto my living room couch, mind spinning with frustration. I thought about my father, also a Marine veteran, who taught me that sometimes you have to stand your ground, even if the odds seem stacked. He used to say, no matter how strong the enemy appears, there's always a weakness. Find it, and you'll find your way forward. Suddenly, my phone buzzed. It was a group text from my old Marine pals, Jax, Simone, and a few others who lived scattered across the state. They were discussing an upcoming reunion, planning a meet-up in a nearby city. I read their messages, remembering the sense of unity I used to feel, the bond formed by shared challenges. Inspiration flared. I texted back, "Any chance you guys want to host the reunion at my place?" A chorus of enthusiastic replies flashed, "Absolutely, and count me in." I couldn't help smiling. If Charlene was going to pick a fight with me on my own turf, maybe it was time to bring in reinforcements. My friends were well versed in strategy, in standing together against intimidation, and I had no doubt that seeing a group of Marines in uniform would test Charlene's resolve. A week later, my house brimmed with the energy of old friends. Simone arrived first, all bright laughter and a bone-crushing hug. Jax followed, slinging a camouflage duffel over his shoulder. By mid-morning, half a dozen Marines, the first served with sprawled across my living room or hovered in the kitchen, catching up on life and cracking jokes. Some wore civvies, but they'd all brought their dress uniforms to pay homage to our military roots. My heart felt lighter than it had in months. Outside, the neighborhood was quiet, though I spied a few curious curtains twitching. Charlene must have noticed the influx of visitors, but she hadn't made an appearance yet. The plan was simple. We'd host a barbecue in the backyard, and if Charlene tried to intervene, we'd be ready with a calm, unified front. But a bigger part of me simply wanted to enjoy the day, to recapture the sense of community and support I'd lost since moving here. We fired up the grill, the air filling with the savory aroma of sizzling steaks and hot dogs. I glanced toward the street, half expecting Charlene to storm up with her clipboard. But for a long stretch, there was no sign of her. My guests and I bantered about old deployments, teased each other about legendary boot camp mishaps, and swapped stories of civilian life. A few neighbors stopped by, cautiously at first, drawn by the easy camaraderie. They stayed for a plate of food, and soon the yard buzzed with conversation. At around 2 in the afternoon, the mood was at its peak when a hush fell over the crowd. Charlene's distinct figure had appeared at the fence line, arms folded. She stood there watching, as though deciding her next move. My heart thumped, but I reminded myself I wasn't alone. I walked over, a smile plastered on my face. "Hello, Charlene. Care to join us for some lunch?" She ignored the invitation. "How many people are here?" she demanded, scanning the gathering. "About 15, maybe a few more," I replied, trying to keep an even tone. "That's well above the 10-person limit for gatherings," she snapped. Have you secured HOA approval? Simone stepped forward, dress uniform impeccable, ribbons gleaming. Is there a regulation that prohibits a homeowner from enjoying a Saturday with friends, ma'am? Charlene blinked at Simone's formal address and crisp salute. She opened her mouth, closed it, then glared. The rules are quite clear. Any gathering over 10 must be approved at least 2 weeks in advance. Jax moved beside Simone. Ma'am, we're simply reuniting after years of service overseas. We're not causing any disturbance. Charlene's complexion reddened. The disturbance is you flouting HOA regulations. I drew a steadying breath. We're outside on my private property, not blocking the street or causing noise violations. If you'd like to call the police, you can. But please note that this is a lawful gathering. I have the right to peaceful assembly. For a moment, Charlene looked downright furious. She glanced around at the uniformed Marines, some of whom were now watching her intently. Perhaps she realized that calling the police on veterans enjoying a barbecue might not go over well. She huffed and stepped back. Fine, she hissed. But this isn't over. Without another word, she spun on her heel and stomped away. A tremor of relief passed through me. My friends quietly cheered, patting me on the back. The tension dissolved as we returned to our food, though my mind lingered on Charlene's promise, this isn't over. A few days after the barbecue, I noticed a piece of paper taped to my front door. It was another official notice, enumerating a list of violations observed over the weekend. Too many cars parked in front of the house, excessive smoke from the grill, loud conversation well into the evening. Each offense carried a fine. My blood boiled at the pettiness. I had half a mind to tear the notice to shreds, but I carefully filed it into my growing evidence folder. I also began reaching out to neighbors more aggressively, using the momentum of the barbecue to forge alliances. I discovered that an entire group of residents privately chafed under Charlene's heavy-handed rule. Still, they feared speaking up because they'd seen how quickly she turned on dissenters. Meanwhile, the legal counsel I consulted encouraged me to document every interaction and prepare for a possible lawsuit. The tension rose to fever pitch when a neighbor confided that Charlene had bragged about running out those who didn't submit to HOA standards. She apparently took pride in pressuring homeowners until they sold or caved to her demands. Finally, I reached my limit. I decided to take a page from my Marine training. If the direct approach wasn't working, maybe I needed a well-planned counteroffensive. I collaborated with my attorney to file a formal complaint against Charlene and the HOA for harassment and overreach of authority. This was no trivial step. HOA lawsuits can be lengthy and expensive. But I couldn't allow her tyranny to continue. In the weeks leading up to the next big HOA meeting, I poured myself into rallying support. My Marine friends created a social media group to share updates, letting people know about the attorney's findings and outlining how residents could protect themselves from frivolous citations. Encouraged, more neighbors spoke up privately, sending me photos of their own finds and strange incidents, garden ornaments removed, holiday lights trashed, even a child's small inflatable pool deflated without permission. I realized that what Charlene had done to me was just the tip of the iceberg. Behind the pristine facades of Mayfield Heights lay a web of intimidation and petty tyranny. Each story I heard stoked my resolve. I printed out every complaint, compiled them into a thick binder. My attorney warned me that HOAs often defend themselves vigorously, but I had faith that if enough people came forward, the truth would prevail. On the night of the meeting, the community center was packed to capacity. Rows of neighbors, some determined, others trembling with anxiety. At the front sat Charlene, flanked by the other board members. Her posture was rigid, eyes scanning the crowd as though she were seeking out traitors. I arrived with Simone and Jax by my side. We wore civilian clothes, but there was no mistaking the authority in our bearing. Word had spread that I was ready to challenge Charlene officially. I felt a twinge of nerves, but also a spark of defiance. I'd faced far scarier opponents than this. The meeting commenced with the usual droning agenda: budgets, landscaping projects, proposals for a new park bench. Then came the floor for member concerns. I stood, binder clutched in my arms. "Miss Alvarez," Charlene said coolly, not even looking up from her notes. "You have 3 minutes." I cleared my throat, voice steady. "I'd like to submit a formal complaint about the misuse of HOA authority in Mayfield Heights. I have documentation showing repeated acts of harassment, trespassing, and confiscation of personal property by the HOA president, namely you, Miss Price." Charlene's head snapped up. A flicker of annoyance crossed her face. "That's a serious accusation. I trust you have evidence?" I held up the binder. "Right here, along with statements from multiple neighbors outlining similar incidents, and I filed a complaint with county officials. My attorney is prepared to take this to court if the board fails to address these grievances." A low murmur rippled through the crowd. Several people nodded, emboldened. Then, to my surprise, one by one, neighbors began standing up. Some recounted how Charlene threatened to fine them for innocuous decorations. Others described how she would lurk on their property, taking pictures through windows or rummaging through gardens. It was a flood of pent-up frustration. Charlene's eyes blazed. She tried to cut people off, claiming they were speaking out of turn, but the new board members, apparently caught in the wave of testimonies, let them speak. You could almost feel the power shifting in the room. Fear had kept people silent, but now that someone took a bold stand, they refused to be intimidated. When the last person finished speaking, Charlene's voice trembled with anger. "You're all exaggerating. The HOA has rules, and I only enforce them for the good of this community." A middle-aged man who'd been silent until then raised his hand. "Ma'am, I've lived here for 30 years, and I've seen many HOA presidents come and go. None were as punitive or invasive as you. You've made this neighborhood feel like a prison." A chorus of agreement swept the room. Charlene looked around, realizing she was now isolated. Even some of her previous supporters seemed to slump back in their chairs, unwilling to defend her harsh tactics. The board members exchanged glances, uncertain how to proceed under such a barrage of accusations. Finally, one of the board members, a woman with short gray hair, cleared her throat. "We'll need to review these complaints carefully. Until then, I propose we suspend the issuance of new fines and citations, and we might need to consider whether Miss Price continues in her capacity as president." I saw Charlene flinch, lips thinning. She tried to protest, but the uproar of approval from the audience drowned her out. In that moment, I felt a surge of vindication. The controlling facade she'd so carefully built was crumbling under the collective weight of the community's outcry. The board launched an internal investigation, combing through a decade's worth of Charlene's complaints and fines. Neighbors were invited to submit written statements. My lawyer helped me draft a detailed narrative of everything that had happened: the intimidation, the confiscation of my fern, the multiple citations over trivial matters. All the while, Charlene hunkered down, refusing to step aside. She insisted she'd done nothing wrong, claiming we were all ungrateful. Yet over the next few months, the tide turned irrevocably against her. Old records showed her personal vendettas, including using HOA funds to mail out multiple notices for the same alleged infractions, effectively doubling and tripling certain fines. Some discovered she never followed due process for approving new regulations. She simply wrote them herself and enforced them. The more the board uncovered, the more outraged people became. Ultimately, the board voted to remove Charlene from her position as HOA president. They rescinded many of the petty rules she'd unilaterally put in place and refunded numerous fines to various homeowners. When I heard the official announcement, I practically cried with relief. It felt like I'd been living under a cloud, and now the sun had finally broken through. Charlene moved out soon after. Some said she couldn't stand the humiliation. Others speculated she was forced out. I never confirmed the rumors, and I never saw her again. Good riddance, I thought, with a twinge of pity, because how empty must someone's life be for them to cling so desperately to a sense of control. With Charlene gone, Mayfield Heights began to feel like the home I'd imagined when I first arrived. The stifling fear dissolved, replaced by an eagerness to connect. Neighbors began chatting freely on sidewalks, hosting potlucks, and discussing ways to improve, not police, the community. We formed a gardening club that actually welcomed unique plants. People displayed garden gnomes with pride, childlike joy replacing the old hush of terror. As for me, I reveled in my renewed sense of ownership. My porch, where Charlene once tried to banish me, became a symbol of victory. I painted the planters in bright blues, yellows, and pinks, and nobody objected. My wind chimes sang gently in the breeze, unchallenged. And there, in the corner, I placed a brand new fern, bigger and bushier than the one Charlene had confiscated. It was my promise to myself. I would never yield my space, my voice, or my sense of belonging again. I also found new purpose in championing the rights of homeowners who felt powerless against overreaching HOAs. My story spread online, and people from different states reached out, sharing similar nightmares. Buoyed by my experience, I helped organize informational sessions about legal recourses and homeowner rights. I realized I could harness the skills I learned in the Marines' leadership, strategy, unity to fight battles that required more than brute force. My front line was now the well-being of a community, not just a single house. My Marine friends remained integral to my journey. We celebrated not just the downfall of Charlene's petty regime, but the deeper connection I'd forged with the neighborhood. Simone joked that I was now the squad leader of Mayfield Heights, though I made it clear I had no aspiration to run an HOA. My goal was simply to ensure nobody else tried to weaponize it the way Charlene had. Time passed, and life settled into a comfortable rhythm. On weekends, I'd share coffee with neighbors on my porch. The children in the cul-de-sac drew hopscotch squares on the sidewalk with bright chalk, filling the air with laughter. Every so often, I'd catch a glimpse of the old fear in someone's eyes, but it was fleeting. Trust takes time to rebuild. In place of Charlene's dictatorship, a new HOA president was elected, a retired nurse named Harriet, who believed in collaborative problem-solving. The difference was night and day. While Harriet upheld basic standards, she invited open forums and discussions. If someone wanted to paint their door turquoise or hang an elaborate flower basket, Harriet asked only that they keep the overall look respectful. The new board also introduced a community vote for major decisions, ensuring transparency. As for me, I found myself at peace. Sitting on my porch at dusk, I'd often reflect on how a single person's obsession with power could upend an entire neighborhood. But I also saw how courage, unity, and shared stories could reclaim it. The call to adventure I once answered in the Marines had simply shifted to a new battlefield, defending the spirit of community from those who'd bulldoze it for their own ego. Now, I'd watch the sunset gild the rooftops in rosy light, my old rocking chair creaking softly, that proud new fern swaying in the breeze. The porch was truly mine, again my safe haven, my vantage point on a world I was learning to love in all its imperfections. Sometimes, the faint memory of Charlene's shrill voice flickered through my mind, but it was overshadowed by the laughter of children, the quiet hum of neighborly conversation, and the distant sound of a lawnmower. Life, in all its glorious normalcy, was good. Thank you for joining me on this winding journey of conflict, courage, and triumph. Through every tense confrontation and stealthy act of sabotage, a single truth emerged. No one should ever feel powerless in their own home. If you found yourself silently cheering each time the tables turned, if you felt your heart pound when my Marine sisters and brothers arrived in uniform, then you know how sweet victory can taste against unrelenting adversity. May this story remind you that true community isn't born of fear, but nurtured by unity, empathy, and the will to stand tall against tyranny. If you enjoyed this tale, please take a moment to like this video, share it with friends, and subscribe for more inspiring content. Your support means everything.